Everyone here. I'll just as people are coming in, my name is Elizabeth Claes, and my last name rhymes with Glaze. And I am an educational consultant. I own an educational consulting company called Becoming Us Collaborative. And I'm here to talk, and I hope that you're here to come and learn a little bit more of a kind of another way that we can engage voices within our communities, within our school systems. All right.
Yes.
So we're going to just open with a question. We were going to be in breakout rooms, and I think we'll do so. Since we have 4 people here, let's put them in groups of 2 for the breakout room. We're going to open a question, then I'm going to give you some definition of what I mean by community liberatory practices. I'm going to give you a short thing about knowledge creation and how that works within our schools, and then more details about what a community of liberatory practice is. So here's our opening question. We're going to go into breakout rooms. I'm just going to give you, it's going to be pretty short, so about 2 minutes each. But I want you to think for a minute about an event or something. It could be a person, but I want you to think more about the event that shaped your K-12 schooling experience. So something that either happened to you or that you did within your schooling experience. All right, welcome back, everyone. Did you get a chance to kind of talk through at least a little bit about something that impacted?
Mhm.
So did someone want to share?
I can.
Yeah, Sarah.
I was sharing that when I was a kid, I like my the math that my school used was like very prescriptive and very like algorithmic.
Mhm.
And it was very hard for me. And like from a very early age, like I hated math. You hear this all the time, right? And I recently had an SVMI training. And when we were doing it, I was like, if I had had this when I was a kid, I probably would have like really liked math, and like I probably would have ended up in the same place. Like I'm a teacher, but there's a lot of things that I wanted to study, like plant science, biology, chemistry, that I simply like was like, it's gonna have too much math. Like I'm gonna struggle. And so I think there's a lot of doors that like I ended up closing because of that very formative experience.
Interesting. And it was so much that the system was doing it to you rather
Yeah,
than,
like just like I didn't get the style that like one particular teacher had. And like there wasn't a sense of like, oh, there's multiple ways to solve a problem. It was there's one way and I couldn't remember it like all the time. Yeah, and like now when I solve problems, like I just like when I do, I'm like, oh, like even if I don't, I like later I'd be like, oh, I could just have done a ratio problem. And I was like, that's not how I naturally do a problem. Like I draw representation, and then I do this, and I'm like, I do different multiplication. And if I had been allowed to do that, then I think I would have found a lot more like comfort and success.
very good. Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing. Is there anyone else who would like to share something that was formative in their K-12 schooling, an event? So for me, between my 7th grade and 8th grade year, I was in 7th grade, I was in a school of about 150, 200, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. I moved to a school that was about 1,500. So um, about 100% increase in population. So I went from a very small context to a very large context in the middle of junior high. And that was a very formative experience of being very central in my school and everyone knowing me to being someone who no one knew. Why I'm talking about this before we go into communities of practice is for all of you, did you have a voice within that experience? Give me a thumbs up if you give me a reaction, yes, I did, or a thumbs down, no, I did not, in the event or events that shaped you. I'm going to assume in this room we have thanks, Bethany. Yeah. And me too. Like it happened to me. And Sarah's story, I got the opportunity to talk to JJ about her story, and her story was very much the system was doing it to her. Dr. Kelly says in his incredible book, Freedom Dreams, he says, without new visions, we don't know what to build, only what to knock down. And coming out of COVID, we have a lot of things that we wanted to knock down after COVID, right? We not only end up confused, rudderless, and cynical, but we forget that making a revolution is not a series of clever maneuvers and tactics, but a process that can and must transform us. If you ever are with me, if you're in my classes, in my grad school classes, if you're in the schools that I work in, humans are the central part of everything I do. And when we are in a system that does a lot of things to us all the time that things are happening to us, we have to do this new initiative, we have to pivot here, the school board did this, all of these things are happening to us, it is very easy to lose track of the people. And the people are what are actually going to transform the system. D. Ray McKeeson, he's a grassroots organizer. He said, we created the system. Humans created the system. This is a butchering of his quote. Humans created the system. We can recreate that system. And so as you're thinking about what I'm talking about, these communities of liberatory practices, what I want you to start to do with whatever context you're in, start to reimagine how could we use this within this context? Because the center of a community of practice are three things. A community of practice or a community of liberatory practices has something that they focus on. There's what we call the domain, something that's a focus. But even more than just the domain is there has to be a community. It's in the wording. And when I think about a community of practice, it's not a representation of the whole space because there are power dynamics that we don't have time to go into, but they share a positionality. What I mean by a positionality is they're in the same place in our hierarchy of education. So students are on the same place, teachers are on the same level, parents are on the same level, administration are on the same level. There's not a mix of levels. Other than that, there can be as much diversity as you want, but they all share the same positionality within that organization and are willing to try to work. They don't have to be your best students. They don't have to be your most engaged parents. They don't have to be the person that always shows up at every PTA meeting. They just have to be willing. And finally, they are willing to share knowledge, tools, language, data, and stories to start to make some kind of change. And so a community of liberatory practices is different than a team. And so I want you just to look at this real quickly and see this. This is a team, like when you're thinking of like a sports team, they have a product, we're going to win this game, we're going to go in and we need to write this document for our administrator. We have a product that we want to get done. And we're going to focus on that shared task. And once it's done, we're going to all disband. And there's a hierarchy. There's someone who's overseeing it and making sure it happens, make sure the meetings happen, get you the agenda. A community of liberatory practices, though, is because we're all on the same positionality. And so if I'm coming in to facilitate a community practice, let's say with a student, I was down in Southern California this past semester working with 2 student groups. And one of the very first things I talk about is I'm not a part of your community of liberatory practice. I'm actually helping it happen. I'm making sure it happens. I'm communicating out, but I'm not a part of it. When the actual
recording in progress.
When the actual decision for that area of focus is there,
Identity first. And language is a great example of like it changes with the person, and it's so easy to ask what they prefer. So thank you for bringing up language because very, very important. Practice what you.
Are we good now? Okay, perfect. That area of focus, it may not be the area of focus that I'm interested in. How many of you are currently a 9th through 12th grade student? So when I have 9th through 12th grade students in a room, what they are thinking about talking about is going to be very different than what I'm thinking about talking about from my positionality as an outside consultant. It's going to be different than what the teachers talk about. It doesn't mean that the teachers or the security or the administrators, theirs aren't important. It's saying we're going to open it up to a space where we're giving some agency and voice to people that we don't always give agency and voice to. And we're going to share the power in this, and we're going to talk about it. And when we're finished talking about this iteration, we get to choose whether we stay or go, but it doesn't disband. It keeps going and building on each other. I want to just define liberatory for you because it is something that's really kind of outside of how we normally think within the educational system. And this is from a really amazing group called Creative Interventions. And they defined it as an approach for addressing harm that does not rely upon the state or other oppressive systems, but instead looks to communities to end harm as central to that group's liberation. So what I want us to just maybe consider is that even though we ourselves who are in this group today, I'm going to make up that you guys are working really hard to break down oppressive systems within your schools, your classrooms, your districts. The system itself is outside of us, has oppression in it already. And so I'm breaking it down on my individual context, but it is all also happening outside of me. What a liberatory approach is it starts to say, who are the communities that are closest to the ground to the oppression? And what are they saying? Those who are closest to the ground are the ones that have the best solutions for how to fix it. And as I move up, I'm getting my doctorate right now. As I move higher in education, I remove myself from the experience of being a 9th through 12th grade student. Doesn't mean, or a parent that doesn't have a college degree, or someone who's doing security on, I remove myself based on those things. Doesn't make me wrong. It just puts me in a different group. When we look to the communities who are closest to the issues, and we ask them, how would they end the harm that's happening to them? And we within the system say, okay, let's use that to inform how we are building out our systems, right? I think about Sarah. Is it okay if I use what you were talking about? But had Sarah been given an opportunity to say, this is happening to me right now, and I don't know exactly how to fix it, but I would like to make a recommendation that we start to look at it. And if that recommendation was given to someone who had the power to start to change it, it may not have impacted Sarah's experience, but it definitely would have impacted the students that came after her. And Sarah would have been part of that change. That's what I'm talking about liberatory. So sometimes people are like, ooh, that feels really scary. But within a system where we have different positions, it actually helps inform us, those who have more power, on how we can make the system less oppressive. Because here's the goal, in my opinion. Let's make an alternative future. Let's bring it into an alternative future. If the inevitability is that we're going to keep our systems exactly the same way as they've always been, if that's the inevitability, I'm not sure I would have gone into education. The amazing addictive thing about education is at the end of every school year, I think, oh, okay, this is how I'm going to make it better next year. This is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to start the year, right? We are always thinking future. And sometimes when we're thinking future, we're making it for us. I'm just asking you to expand that out to people that aren't already at the table. What would it look like if we started to listen to what they say? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about knowledge creation, but before I do, I'm going to stop share just for a second. Are there any questions or any comments, anything that anyone wants to say? I always give people an opportunity to share. Sorry, I have a bug in my contact. I'm waiting for it to get cold enough so that all the flies die. Okay, I'm going to keep going if you guys are good. It's so good to see you. Thanks for just showing up. I'm always like just so thankful when people show. I'm going to talk a little bit about knowledge creation. And we're going to go get a little bit geeky for a moment. And I promise it's not going to get too geeky, but I want us to think about this. There's a little book, this book, Nanaka wrote this book, Ikujiro Nanaka, and he wrote it for business people. It's about 30 pages. It's tiny. I couldn't find mine. You know why? It's so small, it gets lost on my bookshelf, and I never can find it. But I also have it on Kindle, so I always look it up there. They talk about two types of knowledge. They talk about explicit knowledge, this kind of formalized knowledge. So the stuff that we have in our books, that we have in our curriculum, but it kind of expands it out. It's our television shows that we watch. It's our consistent music that we listen to. It's the things that we kind of share in a culture that it's easy to share. Hey, I'm going to share this YouTube that I saw, and then that gets shared. A really good example was the Brene Brown on vulnerability a few years ago, where everyone was sharing it. That became explicit knowledge, right? So now when I go into rooms, whereas before you're explaining what the difference between shame and guilt is, now I go into rooms and I say, how many of you watched that YouTube or that TED Talk? And most of the time I have at least a few hands that go up. It's become part of our explicit knowledge. So education, like this is the stuff that we as educators are sharing, right? Like we're writing it down, we're making sure some of it's coming at us. Sometimes we are actually sharing, hey, I have a great book I want to share with you, that kind of thing. And it's the center. But I want to tell you about the other one, and that's tacit knowledge. That's that highly personal knowledge that comes from experience. In the dark ages, when I was going to teaching methodology school, tacit knowledge was kind of part of schema, where you were bringing in new stuff and you were thinking about schema. Oftentimes your tacit knowledge is what I call your gut knowledge. It's not always verbalized, and sometimes I'll be reading a book, especially a memoir, and someone will say something and I will know it in my gut that it's true, but I've never been able to verbalize it to others. So it's the things that if our students are coming in with these experiences that are outside of our own experiences. I go back to JJ's story where she was talking about the culture of her youth actually had a big impact on her education. And if she was to talk to someone who was also in that educational system, you both would have kind of a gut knowledge of what it was like. But to me, you were explaining some tacit knowledge because it wasn't my experience, right? It was a highly personal experience. I think of the Me Too movement, where the shadow whispering, where women would tell other women about who were the predators. That was tacit knowledge. When we take explicit knowledge to explicit or tacit to not tacit, that's wonderful. But I'll tell you where the amazing collision of new knowledge happens, where the magic happens in this system. It happens when we have tacit knowledge and explicit knowledge, and those two collide. Creating new knowledge is not simply a matter of processing objective information. So it's not just regurgitation on a test. All of us know that. We've been in this, we've done standardized testing enough. We know just processing, it's not enough. It depends on tapping into that tacit and often highly subjective insights, intuitions, and hunches of the individual. You know, like I have a gut that this space is either safe or not safe. Have you ever had a student say, I love your class because it feels safe, but they can't tell you why it feels safe? In our business, or like when we've worked, have you had committees you've been on where it felt safe and where it didn't feel safe, right? It's those insights are what give the whole of an institution. And why schools are so amazing is they are primed for this collision between the explicit and the tacit, right? And oftentimes we ignore the tacit for the explicit because the system has told us we have to do it. I go back to Sarah's story. The system told her that she had a singular way of how she had to do math. That was explicit knowledge. In her understanding and her intuition, she knew that there had to be another way. When she was able to collide that into new knowledge, she is now doing amazing things. I'm just going to make that up. I don't know, but I'm going to make up. So I'm going to give you an opportunity. I don't know how many of you are here. How many do we have, JJ, now?
We have 8 participants.
Okay. So I'm going to break you into 2 groups of 4. Okay. And I want you to start talking about, like, within your system, wherever you are, what if I was to take a piece of paper right here and draw a line down and say explicit knowledge and tacit knowledge, and I am going to kind of look at my resources within my space. What would I list down in that explicit knowledge? Like, what are the things I have? And what do I have on my tacit knowledge? Right? Who are my storytellers? Who are the people that are going to tell me how the space was? Who are that? And then I want you to kind of look at those 2 lists and say, what's missing? I didn't put that question here. And I'm going to give the next slide where I have the definitions here. So you can take a picture of this with your camera. Okay. And these are just the same definitions I had before. But I want you to start to think, where am I missing? And what are some ways that we could start to build out this collision between explicit and tacit? Are there any questions of what I'm asking you to do? And let me see, what's our time? Okay, I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to do this. We'll come back a little, at about 18 after. So if there are no questions on what I'm asking you to do, and if you just want to talk about how you're doing, you can also do that, because part of this is just getting to know each other. Don't forget to introduce yourself and tell each other who you are and where you are, if you don't already know each other. Welcome back. Welcome back. All right. Is there anything that anyone would like to share? And I think we have one more group that we're still waiting on. Something that they noticed, something that was like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. I'll give you an opportunity to think through that, or we can just proceed on. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back, room 2. I just posed the question, is there anything that anyone noticed or wanted to share, that a different voice than just mine? I'm always like, give some more other voices. I have enough in my head of my own voice. Or was it just nice to just have a little time to talk to each other? Okay, let me share my screen, and we're going to talk a little bit more now about what it is, who, and how do we start to use this as one of the ways to combine that explicit and that tacit knowledge. So when I go into a school or a district, sometimes I'm going into districts. There's a rather large district in the southern part of the state that I think there were like about 20-ish comprehensive high schools, and I was in 11 of them running these groups. So when I'm talking about who's going to be a part, it's showing up and engaging. So if you don't want to talk, that's okay, but this might not be the space for you. Again, I'm not looking for the most involved people, just people who have ideas. And as a group, after we get to kind of know each other and we're engaging with each other, we start to think about what is an area of inequity within our own context. So like, I've had students look at, okay, yeah, one of the groups looked at not, they looked at the security officers on their campus, but they weren't looking at them in the area of discipline. They were looking at them in the area of relationship. And so they decided that they didn't know the security on their campus. They were very involved. And so they went out, and that moves us into the third space to look at gathering new knowledge. And they interviewed all the security people that were on campus to kind of learn about them, get more knowledge about who they were as people, what their goals were. They also looked at official data of what their jobs were, what the like their job description, how many of them there were, who was in what area of the campus. And so they looked at the kind of official data of what they could find, the quantitative, and then they gathered some stories. And then together, that group of students said, okay, these are the things that if we want to have a better relationship with people on our campus, specifically between students and the people who are doing security, this is what we see as recommendations of what we can change. And then they took those recommendations. I teach them how to speak in front of power. We talk about how do you present this in a way that people can hear you. And then they present it. And in this context, there were 11 schools in the whole, and they were presenting to like 5 other schools, plus their principal, plus district leadership, who were all coming for this. And it's really fun. It's a day of celebration. And as a result, what the leadership now has is not only their opinions on what they should do, but another space, another source of information that they would not have been able to get outside of some type of process like this. So who makes up the groups? Again, it's just someone who shares the same level of power within the system. And I have students here twice, because here's the thing. Sometimes I'll go into schools and I'll say, you want students, you want the racial makeup of your school. So you want to make sure you have representation of different races. You want to make sure you have representation between those who are going to university, those who are going to trade school, those that are going to not continue education after, special ed. You want a full representation of the whole of your system. And so you want to make sure that you have people that are going to represent. Again, looking back, you want to make sure that they're willing to engage. So if they're like, no, I don't want to engage this, then they aren't going to be able to. The second students is, if I am looking at, so I was in a school district earlier this year that had been identified that Black students were being suspended at a higher rate than the rest of the population within this district. And so when I went into that school, I was in 2 groups. The first group, and I was working with students, the first group was the students that were representational of the whole. The second group was primarily Black students, because they were being marginalized in a different way by the system even though their percentages were lower within the system, their marginalization was unique. And that was what was bringing me into the context. And so we wanted to get their perspective because they're going to have a unique perspective. So you can go either way. Neither way is wrong. Usually when you're talking about a marginalized group, there's a reason, like the reason I'm on campus is because, and so we want to make sure that we represent them. Parents, again, you can have two different types of parent group. If you have a parent group like that's very representational of the whole, you can also have parent groups that are of a certain group of students. So let's say if you had translation and you had students who were in English, learning English learners, and you wanted to get the unique experience of what it is for the parents of English learners within the system, then you may want them as an individual group. I have never been able to get a school to do this, but I would love to sit with the campus supervisors and the security personnel. I would actually like to sit with the cafeteria people who do the food. I would love to have a group with the custodians because I know that they are seeing things on the campus that no one else sees, and their perspectives are going to be rich in that tacit experiential knowledge that's going to be able to make the system better. I was up in Washington State. I had a group of family liaisons. These people were fantastic, and they were all at different schools, but they were all working with families. And so that's the kind of the next best to actually being with families. And then any other groups that are specific to your context. So you can do a teacher group. You can do paraprofessional group. Like there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. It's kind of like, where are you wanting to investigate? Now, here's the thing about students and why I started with them and want to make sure that we kind of send. And I had a colleague, a wonderful woman, Victoria is her name. And Victoria once was giving this kind of presentation, what I am, and I was supporting her. She was doing this part of the presentation. And she said something about students. And she said, we often say that students are most important, and we rarely listen to their voices. And she got a lot of pushback. There were principals who were so angry at her for saying that. So I want to kind of give a context of what I'm talking about. And that is within our system, and this is happening to us too, within the system. Within our system, all the things that are happening, that tyranny of the urgent, the next thing that's coming down, we have to do this, we have to write this report, we have this new standardized test, we've got to learn this new curriculum, right? It's happening to us. And because it's happening to us, it doesn't give us a lot of space and capacity to actually slow down and listen. And it's not our faults. And so what I'm saying is, if we build into the system ways to garner student support, and this is just one of many, there's a lot of other ways we can do this. So like, this isn't magic. This is not like, oh, you have to do it this way. This is just one. I'm just giving you a suggestion. Imagine more. Do whatever works. If we build in so that we are talking to students in a different way, eliciting from them, and we're eliciting from not just our highest achiever students, but students that represent, you will start to hear things. I tell you what, I had a group where the students were talking about suspension and the impact of suspension. And the way these students, and primarily in that particular group, almost all of them had been suspended at least once. And the way they talked about it was the opposite of how I would have thought they would have talked about it. And as they were trying to figure out new ways to look at that as a practice, they were giving me so much insight of what it is to experience it. And so that's the only reason why I put students first. I think our security, I think our parents, I think our family liaisons, I think our parents, I think our paraprofessionals, everyone needs a space. And if we don't build spaces for these students and then take the time to listen, they will inevitably be the ones that are crushed by the system. And if we're going back to that oppressive systems, when we're talking about liberatory, they are the closest to the ground. And I keep quoting closest to the ground. That's from a book called Why School by Mike Rose. And he talked about if you are not accessing those who are closest to the issue, you are going to inevitably create, and this is my own, I've done this. When I'm creating systems, I will inevitably create a system that works best for me because I know the problems that are closest to me. And we as educators are called to do more, and it's hard. And you're sitting here in this room, so yay. So whatever that looks like for you, do not feel shame right now. You guys are already doing it. Give yourself a pat on the back. Tell yourself, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad I'm here. So I look at 3 areas. I'm going to look at the time. We're a little, okay. Policy, practice, and program. Policy, very quickly, that's what's written down. Practice is how the policy actually functions in a system, sometimes unintended consequences. And programs are the programs that we put in place. And so I asked my groups to look at one of those 3. And then I asked them to dissect and choose an area. Most student groups, especially, but even my family liaison group, that group, man, they could not figure out which one they wanted to look at. But I want them to look at one. And sometimes they overlap, like for the group that was looking at security and relationships with students, they looked at engagement as opposed to discipline, but it was absolutely impacting discipline, right? If we have relationships with the people on our campus in a restorative way. Sometimes demographics, we're looking specifically, so that would be a group that if I'm looking at a specific group, and sometimes they overlap. So we might be looking at academics, and we're looking at course selection, and then we're also looking at English language learners. And so by the time, so these people have tested in, so like they started out as English language learners, they are no longer identified as English language learners, but now when they're making their course selection, are they able to have access to the same things, right? Like that would be just an example of what. Actually, I had students investigate that exact thing once. I want you to consider, and I know I'm kind of talking to the choir right now, but I want you to consider the following question. In whatever context you are, whether you are a leader within your context, or you are a teacher, or you're a paraprofessional, or you work at the county, or whatever, wherever you are. And we're all leaders. Teachers are leaders too. I wonder how our schools would change if our educational leaders, that includes our teachers and our paraprofessionals, anyone who is working with people, if we took off our managerial hat, or we have to get this next thing done, we have to do this, we have to do that, the urgent, which is so real. So don't think I'm minimizing that. It is so real. But if we took that out for a moment and we actually observed the system in which we are in, and we started to take into account of what it is. There's a man called, his name is Luis Alberto Herrera. He's an author, and he has written a lot around the southern border. He was born in Tijuana. He grew up in San Diego. And he wrote a short essay in a book I'll have to find the name of. He wrote, and in that essay, he said this: what if there's no other? What if there's only us? in a system that seeks to divide us into groups. I'm in the teacher group. That's where the paraprofessionals work. That's where the leaders are. That's where the students are, all the groups. And a system that seeks to divide us. Are there ways that we can be brought together? And when I think of a community of liberatory practices, even though I'm separating students out, I'm separating the security out, what they are informing me about and informing the leadership about is the us, is the whole. And they have a unique perspective on the whole, but they are not being pulled out to keep them out. They are being pulled out so that their voices can be heard in all the other. So just, if I had one thing that I could give you, some magic that I could give to your campus, it would be to allow you a little bit of space to observe. So are there any questions? And then I have one more activity if we have time, but I want to give time for questions. With about 10 more minutes or comments. You're going to make it hard on me, aren't you? It's okay. All right. I'm going to put you back into breakout rooms. And here's your final activity. At the end of today's session, I want you to share in your group one of these three things. And let me share my screen again. I want you to share either something that I'm thinking, something that I'm feeling, or something that you plan to do in the next few weeks based on what you learned today. Something I'm thinking, or something I'm feeling, or something I'm planning to do based on what you heard today. And you don't have to do all three, just one of those. And I'm going to give you about 5 minutes. You're going to go back. We're going to mix those groups. Let's do different groups. And if we can just mix them up real quick and everyone just have an opportunity to talk, and then I'll pull you back in about 5 minutes. All right. Well, did everyone get a chance? Give me a thumbs up. Did everyone get a chance to talk? All right, good. That's what I want. I don't have to hear you guys. I trust you that you're talking about wonderful things, whatever they are. Here's just my information if you wanted to know a little bit and ask me questions outside of this context. I run the company Becoming Us Collective, and there's my email and my phone number. You can take a picture. If you would like a copy of the slides, I am going to send it to the powers that be of this conference. But if you would like a personalized, please reach out to me, or in the chat, you can put your email and I'll grab that and I will send you a copy of the slide deck if that is something interesting to you. Other than that, I want to thank you for coming. I look forward. I'll be over in San Jose. I live in the Central Valley, but I'll be over in San Jose tomorrow. So hopefully I get to meet some of you. But make sure to come say hello to me. I don't know what everyone looks like because of the context of how virtual is. But if there is, perfect. I see some emails, and I really appreciate all of you. Are there any questions, or I can let you go because I think our time is just about up. Thank you for staying, folks.